Picture this. It is early Tuesday morning, May 19th, 2026. Somewhere in the Indian Ocean west of Malaysia, a massive oil tanker called the Skywave is making its way through open water. The crew believes they are safe. They are thousands of miles from the Strait of Hormuz. They are thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf. They passed through the Strait of Malacca days ago. They are carrying more than 1 million barrels of Iranian crude oil loaded at Kharg Island in February. And they believe that distance means safety. They are wrong. A highly trained U.S. Coast Guard tactical team moves in. The Skywave is boarded. The crew is confronted. The vessel is seized. 1 million barrels of Iranian crude oil worth tens of millions of dollars disappears from Iran's accounts in an instant. And Donald Trump walks up to a podium at the United States Coast Guard Academy graduation ceremony the very next day and tells the graduates exactly what happened. He tells them that this is the third sanctioned Iranian vessel the Coast Guard has helped capture since the real fighting began. And then he adds 5 words that should make every oil smuggler connected to Tehran's shadow fleet stop breathing for a moment. Many more to come. This is not a routine maritime enforcement action. This is a message. And the message is aimed at every single vessel in Iran's shadow fleet, a network of nearly 1,000 aging tankers operating under false flags, fake ownership structures, and deliberately obscured routes, designed to move Iranian crude oil to buyers in China, India, and elsewhere, while evading the sanctions that are supposed to be choking Tehran's war machine. The message says, we will find you. It does not matter if you are in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, the Indian Ocean, or west of Malaysia. We will find you, we will board you, and we will take your oil. The Kharg Island route that Iran has been using to pump crude into its shadow network is not safe anymore. Not in the Strait. Not in the Gulf. Not in the open ocean. Nowhere. If you are watching this channel for the first time, subscribe right now. What you are about to understand is not just a story about one tanker. It is a story about how the United States is systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure that Iran uses to fund its military, its nuclear program, its proxies, and its ability to keep fighting this war. Every barrel of oil that does not reach a buyer is money that does not reach an IRGC commander. Every tanker seized is a message to the next captain who thinks distance means safety. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because this story is moving fast. Let us establish exactly what the Skywave is, because the details tell a bigger story than a single seizure. The Skywave is a very large crude carrier, a VLCC, with a deadweight tonnage of 302,481. That is an enormous vessel. It is one of the largest category of oil tankers in the world. It was built in 2005 and operated for years under the name Blue Gulf before being sold in March 2025 to an unidentified buyer, a sale that coincided precisely with the United States placing sanctions on the vessel. The sanctioned ownership structure traces to United Tankers registered in the Marshall Islands and Lakeview Ship Management Private Limited registered in India, both designated by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control for their involvement in the Iranian oil trade. The vessel was operating under a false flag. It had changed its name. It had obscured its ownership. It had loaded its cargo at Kharg Island in February, months before the seizure, and spent months slowly moving that cargo toward a buyer. Everything about its operation was designed to be invisible. It was not invisible. Ship tracking data showed the Skywave moving west of Malaysia after passing through the Strait of Malacca on Tuesday, May 19th. This location is significant. The Strait of Malacca is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, connecting the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. Ships carrying Iranian crude to Chinese buyers routinely transit this route. By seizing the Skywave in this location, the U.S. is not just enforcing sanctions in the immediate area of the conflict. It is demonstrating that its enforcement reach extends across the entire globe into shipping lanes that Iranian oil exporters previously considered beyond Washington's operational range. Now let us understand what Kharg Island actually is and why the words Kharg Island route is finished carry so much weight. Kharg Island sits in the Persian Gulf approximately 20 miles off the Iranian mainland. It handles up to 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. The island contains enormous oil storage facilities connected by pipelines to Iran's largest oil and gas fields. Falat Iran Oil Company on the island produces 500,000 barrels of crude oil per day. This is the single most important piece of oil export infrastructure in the entire Iranian economy. Without Kharg, Iran cannot export oil at scale. U.S. and Israeli forces struck Kharg Island during Operation Epic Fury, and while Iran claimed no oil infrastructure was damaged, satellite imagery showed tankers continuing to use the loading berths afterward. The U.S. military said it targeted naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and other military sites on the island. But the real campaign against Kharg is not being fought with bombs. It is being fought with tanker seizures, sanctions, and a naval blockade that is making every barrel that leaves Kharg a potential target for interception anywhere on Earth. Here is where this story connects directly to your daily life. Iran earns somewhere between $30 and $50 billion a year from oil exports in a normal year. That money funds everything: the IRGC's salaries, the missile program, the proxy networks in Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen, the nuclear enrichment facilities, the political apparatus of the regime. When the U.S. blockade prevents ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports, when the Coast Guard seizes tankers carrying Iranian crude in the Indian Ocean, when Treasury sanctions 19 more vessels under Operation Economic Fury, every one of those actions reduces the money available to Tehran to continue this war. And when Tehran has less money, the pressure on its negotiators to accept a deal increases. The $107 oil price you are feeling at the pump right now is directly tied to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the disruption to Gulf production. But it is also the mechanism through which the U.S. is suffocating Iran's ability to fund its own military. You are paying more at the pump, partly because the same war that is closing Hormuz is also closing off Iran's ability to sell its oil to the global market. Subscribe to this channel right now. We cover the Iran-US war, the shadow fleet operations, the sanctions campaign, and the economic consequences every single day. Every development in this story matters to everyone who pays for energy. Hit that subscribe button. Now let us talk about Operation Economic Fury, because it is the financial war running parallel to the military and diplomatic wars that most coverage ignores. On the same day the Skywave seizure was reported, the U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announced one of the broadest sanctions packages yet under the Economic Fury campaign. Treasury sanctioned the Iranian exchange house Amin Exchange, also known as Ibrahimi & Associates Partnership Company, which operates a sprawling network of front companies spanning the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Hong Kong. Amin Exchange facilitates hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign currency transactions annually, allowing Iran to bypass international financial sanctions and access global currency markets. The network is run by Youssef Ibrahimi, who holds multiple citizenships, including Turkish and Dominican, obtained through investment programs assisted by a former Revolutionary Guard officer named Samad Namati. These are not small operators. These are sophisticated financial engineers who built a global system specifically designed to launder Iran's oil money through international banking systems in jurisdictions that do not cooperate with U.S. sanctions enforcement. Treasury also designated 19 additional vessels under the same action, all allegedly involved in transporting Iranian crude oil, liquefied petroleum gas, methanol, petrochemicals, and naphtha to foreign buyers. The vessels operate under flags from Barbados, Palau, Panama, and other jurisdictions with weak sanctions compliance. Among them are the Barbados-flagged Great Sail, the Palau-flagged Ocean Wave, and the Panama-flagged Swift Falcon. These vessels have collectively transported hundreds of millions of dollars in Iranian petroleum products to foreign buyers, generating revenue that flows directly back into the Iranian war machine. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the message from Economic Fury is clear. Washington is systematically dismantling Tehran's shadow banking system and shadow fleet, and financial institutions worldwide must recognize that Iran manipulates the international financial system at a scale that requires global vigilance. Here is the thing nobody is discussing loudly enough. The shadow fleet is not just an Iranian operation. It is a global infrastructure of evasion that Iran shares with Russia. The same aging tankers, the same false flag techniques, the same ship-to-ship transfer operations in remote waters, the same ownership structures through Marshall Islands and Panama entities are used by both sanctioned exporters. When the U.S. seizes the Skywave in the Indian Ocean, it is not just disrupting Iranian oil exports. It is sending a signal to every participant in the global gray market tanker ecosystem that American enforcement is prepared to operate anywhere in the world. That signal matters not just for Iran, but for Russia, Venezuela, and every other sanctioned exporter using the same infrastructure. The Skywave seizure is the most geographically remote enforcement action in the entire Iran war so far. It happened in the Indian Ocean, far from the Gulf, far from Hormuz, far from where anyone watching this conflict expected Washington to reach. The Kharg Island congestion numbers tell the story of how the blockade is working in combination with these seizures. Satellite imagery taken on May 16th showed approximately 23 tankers gathered around Kharg Island's anchorages and loading berths. That is the largest concentration of vessels at the location since the U.S. naval blockade began on April 13th. But here's the critical detail. The crude loading berths at Kharg remained unoccupied. 23 tankers waiting. No crude being loaded. Why? Because every captain operating an Iranian-connected vessel now knows that loading at Kharg means becoming a target for interception, not just in the Gulf, but anywhere on Earth for as long as that cargo remains aboard. U.S. Central Command has redirected 89 commercial vessels as part of blockade enforcement. It has disabled 4 ships. It has seized 3 shadow fleet tankers in the Indian Ocean. The 4th Kharg-loaded cargo to attempt escape from the blockade may not make it to Malaysia. It may not make it past the Strait of Malacca. The next captain who thinks the Indian Ocean is a safe zone now knows differently. Donald Trump's words at the Coast Guard Academy are worth reading carefully in this context. He told the graduates that this is the 3rd sanctioned Iranian vessel the Coast Guard has helped capture, and then he said many more to come. He also said it will soon be clear whether the U.S. will sign a deal with Iran or whether the military has to go in and finish the job. That phrase, finish the job, is a direct reference to the strike that was 1 hour from being launched on May 18th and was postponed at Gulf state request. Trump is simultaneously running a diplomatic track, a military threat track, and now an unmistakably global financial enforcement track. All 3 are designed to create maximum pressure on Tehran before whatever window remains in the 72-hour diplomatic pause closes. Iran's response to the Skywave seizure has not yet been formally issued. But Iran's pattern throughout this conflict has been to respond to each U.S. enforcement action with a counteraction in the maritime domain. When the U.S. seized the cargo ship Tuska near the Strait of Hormuz in April, Iran seized 2 foreign commercial vessels in retaliation within 24 hours. When the U.S. fired on and disabled 2 Iranian tankers on May 8th, Iran launched retaliatory drone attacks on UAE infrastructure. The Skywave seizure happened in the Indian Ocean, far from where Iran's naval assets are concentrated. Iran cannot easily respond in kind in that location, but Iran has other tools. Drone attacks on Gulf infrastructure. Missile strikes against UAE facilities, continued mining of the Strait of Hormuz, and the Houthi network in Yemen, which has Red Sea access and has already demonstrated its willingness to strike ships far from Hormuz. The global economic picture created by this conflict is one where every escalation, whether military, diplomatic, or financial, ripples outward into energy markets and ultimately into household budgets. The U.S. Energy Department projects oil prices will remain above $100 a barrel in the coming weeks. U.S. Central Command continues to blockade Iranian ports. Treasury continues to sanction new vessels under economic fury. The Coast Guard continues to seize shadow fleet tankers in remote ocean waters. And Kharg Island, the beating heart of Iran's oil export infrastructure, sits surrounded by 23 waiting tankers with empty loading berths, its crude unable to reach buyers, its revenue unable to reach the regime. The war against Iran's oil is being fought on 3 fronts simultaneously. In the Gulf, where the naval blockade prevents ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports. In the courts, where the Justice Department is filing forfeiture proceedings against seized vessels. And in the global financial system, where Treasury is dismantling the exchange houses, front companies, and false flag shipping networks that allow Iranian crude to become Chinese or Indian or Malaysian oil by the time it reaches a buyer. The Skywave was caught carrying oil that Iran tried to disguise as something else, loaded months ago, moved through one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, tracked by satellite, intercepted in open ocean. Tehran tried to run the blockade not through the strait but around the entire world, and still the Coast Guard found it. What do you think Iran does next? Comment A if you believe Iran retaliates against U.S. or Gulf assets within 48 hours in response to the Skywave seizure. Comment B if you think this seizure increases pressure on Iranian negotiators to accept a deal before more oil revenue disappears. Comment C if you believe China intervenes to protect its Iranian oil supply chains and confronts Washington over these seizures in the Indian Ocean. Tell us exactly what you think happens next.